When you first noticed these, and I think you said it was on November 10th, and you were seeing them in clusters of about 5 to 10 at a time, and then ultimately it was November 14th that Fravor encounters them, correct?
That's correct, yep.
Were you seeing them on the 10th through the 13th engaging in kind of bizarre maneuvers, or were they just hovering out there?
Yeah, that was bizarre in the sense that they were in loose, very loosely formed groups of 5 to 10 each. And the weird thing about it, Jim, is they're at 28,000 feet going about 100 knots, which is really, really, really slow, bizarrely slow for that altitude. Usually something that high in the sky going that slowly is going to fall out of the sky instead. So that was bizarre, yes. But they did not perform any strange, other than their slow movement, they did not perform any strange maneuvers.
And do they appear to be in a particular formation or always reappearing in the same type of formation?
No, if I could describe it, in fact, I've got snow on the ground here in Oregon. If you could look at snow falling from the sky on a calm winter day, that's kind of the way they look like on the scope. They're just in loose groups of 4 or 5. They maintain their relative position to each other. And we're just tracking really, really slowly from Catalina Island down to an island off the coast of Baja, California, where I was noticing they were all disappearing off my radar at that point.
And referring to their speed, I mean, I guess obviously a helicopter can go at that speed, right?
Certainly, yes.
Or a drone theoretically could.
Mm-hmm.
But normal jet propulsion aircraft could not travel that slowly.
Not to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until Fravor intercepts them that they first exhibited this ability to go at supersonic speeds.
Yeah, in that moment. In fact, it was on the 14th, and I was getting ready to we're getting ready to launch a big air defense exercise. We called them ADEXs. And Captain Smith comes down to Combat Information Center. I call it CIC. And I said, "Hey, sir, we've been tracking these anomalous objects, and no one in the strike group knows what the hell they are. And we're getting ready to launch a bunch of aircraft, not only off the Nimitz, but off San Diego too. And we're going to do this big mock air battle in the sky. And now these objects are in our airspace, and I'm very concerned for safety of flight. And I really recommend that we intercept one and see what it is, see if it's something we need to be concerned about." He's like, "You know what, Senior Chief, you're right. Pick one and go intercept it." And Commander Fravor just happened to be airborne, and the E-2 Hawkeye, the big radar, airborne radar system we have, didn't have a very good track on him. So we took control. We vectored Fravor up that way. It was a fast eagle flight. And he gets to that position in the sky. We call it a merge plot. What a merge plot means is 2 objects in the same vertical piece of sky. And if you look at on a 2-dimensional display now, it looks like one object. They've merged together. Not necessarily at the same altitude. It just means they're in the same vertical piece of sky. He gets there. We have his comms and the overhead speaker in CIC, and all of a sudden he starts yelling, oh my God, I'm engaged. And I look back at the scope, and that object that he had intercepted dropped from 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean in less than a second.
Yeah, I heard you describe that before, and it was interesting to hear what he means by engagement. Describe that again for me, because I may have a follow-up question about that.
Engagement, I've never really liked that word very much, because a lot of people that don't know think that we're shooting at each other. And it simply doesn't mean that. It simply means that we're in a non-shooting dogfight, essentially. You're turning on me, and I'm turning on you.
So aircraft. Is that what Fravor was talking about? That they were mirroring each other?
That's what he was talking about. He went chasing. He left his wingman up at altitude, and Commander Fravor chases this object down to the water because he's really curious of what it is. And this thing notices him. It's aware of him. It turns on him, and he starts turning on it, and it starts turning back on him. And they actually, for lack of a better way to say it, I guess they did a barrel roll around each other. And next thing you know, this this object goes from his position there to a point of about 60 miles away in a couple of seconds, right back to a point in the sky that's called a combat air patrol station, which is really nothing more than just a notional point in the sky that we populate. And it's just a hangout spot for the air crews until they get a mission or a vector. They just kind of turn lazy circles in the sky right there. But we don't know And I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows how this object knew where that point was. And Jim, it not only in the latitude and longitude, but actually at the right altitude as well. It went.
Did you talk
just stayed there?
Did you talk to Fravor?
It hovered.
Did you talk to him when he got back to the boat? I guess he got back to the Nimitz.
Yeah, he went back to the Nimitz. Of course, I was on the USS Princeton, and I did talk to Commander Fravor. We had a kind of a lessons learned meeting, and when we got back to San Diego, and I went up to him and reminded him who I was, and basically asked him what he saw. So I did have a chance to speak with him a little bit. But since that time, since 2004, I haven't spoken a single word to Commander Fravor.
And in that conversation, did he describe to you what he saw?
Yeah, he's like, if I could describe it, it looked like about the same length of my FN-18 Super Hornet, which is about 47 feet. It had no doors, no windows, no ailerons, no obvious means of propulsion. It was pure white. And in fact, it looked like a big giant Tic Tac candy mint, is what he told me.
So Fravor was perhaps the first to identify it as a Tic Tac, which we all now refer to it as.
I long thought that, but apparently another pilot that actually shot the Flare video, the Flare 1 video, his name is Chad Underwood. I guess he gets credit for first calling it the Tic Tac.
And how would you describe Fravor's mentality at that time?
When I saw him in person, I think he was. I think we were all just incredulous. We didn't know what the hell to think. I'd never seen anything like this. Even when they were going high and slow, I had never seen anything like this. And after his intercept had happened, Jim, I have to tell you, man, I was pretty damn convinced we were looking at something definitely non-Newtonian. It wasn't obeying the laws of physics that I studied in high school and college. It was, that thing it went from 28,000 feet down to about 50 feet off the water and did not make a sonic boom. And it did it. And I found out the next day, 0.78 seconds. That should have made a very loud damn boom. And it just didn't do that. I knew I wouldn't have necessarily heard it on the ship. I was, 60 miles away or so, but none of the air crews reported hearing a sonic boom either. And they were, they were right there with it.
Tell me more about this lessons learned meeting. Who was in this meeting and what else was talked about?
Every time we come home and we do a post exercise meeting, we like to just talk shop basically and write down things that we could do better next time and things that happened. In other words, this meeting that we had was not about the UAPs at all. Gotcha. It was a scheduled meeting that we would have had anyway.
So
it's just to document lessons learned. So next time we go train, we can do a little bit better.
Were the UAPs brought up in the meeting?
Almost immediately. Yeah. Because it was, I was the one doing the presentation and everyone was looking at me like, Senior Chief, I could just read their faces. So I had to broach the subject.
Mm-hmm. What about, did you get descriptions from the other pilots of what they saw?
The only pilot that represented in that meeting was there was two of them there, I believe, Commander Fravor and one of his shipmates from the squadron, and they were both talking about the same types of things and how bizarre it was.
So you sent them out there to inspect because they were about to do these exercises. My question is, did they end up doing the exercises?
No, we ended up actually canceling the exercise because these objects were in our airspace now, and they were maneuvering and behaving extremely bizarrely. So we just didn't feel safe flying aircraft in that same piece of sky with them.
Wow. So for how many days did they hold off on the exercises?
We never did do it.
And ultimately, did the Nimitz deploy?
Yeah, months later. This was actually a part of our training. It was part of our training cycle, and when the ship got back to San Diego in later that December, when we finally went back to San Diego, I actually transferred from the ship, so I didn't go on deployment with them. But it was just several months later they did go on deployment.
So that's pretty interesting, though, that the exercises were canceled. So, whose decision do you think that was?
My recommendation to the captain and the captain making the call, and it was all based on safety of flight. If I could describe Navy training in a single word, it would be safety.
Mm-hmm. But that's pretty significant, right? I mean, these things don't get canceled very often, I would imagine.
Not very often, no.
So you heard him say, "Oh my God, I'm engaged, I'm engaged." What else did you hear him say?
It was pretty. You know, our air control communications are pretty structured. In fact, we won't hardly say anything on the radio until it's time to. So the pilots, you know, they're trying to prosecute an air war, so they don't want a guy chatting in their ear. So it was pretty quiet on the radio, actually.
So the fact that he said anything is significant. Is that fair to say? It's unusual for them to be talking like that.
Yeah, and I was actually in the position of air control supervisor. So the actual air controller, who has not come forward yet, and I'm not going to throw him under the bus, but I was standing right beside him with a long headset on, with a long corded headset. And he was actually given what we call bearing range altitude aspect, or called bra calls. And that was basically the only comms on.
And would there have been
go ahead.
Would there have been a recording of that?
Absolutely. In fact, this is kind of where it gets bizarre, because there's been some of my other shipmates that come out and said that people came on board our ships and took our data. You know, I have to tell you, Jim, when this was all happening, that was not my situational awareness at all. I was not aware of that, but I can corroborate it, because the next morning I didn't know what the hell to do. The captain had bizarrely shown a real strange incuriousness about this whole thing. And I wanted to write an after action message, because I'm the guy that writes most of those types of messages. So I went up to combat and I was going to pull up the voice recordings that get recorded, the optical disc, so that I would have something to make a message from. And all the voice recorders were missing. They were all gone. And the weird thing is, the technician standing there, and I could tell by looking at it, that he probably knew what happened to it. But I also knew enough not to ask him, because he couldn't tell me. I could tell.
Was that
my experience corroborates?
Was that Voorhees?
No, it was actually his supervisor.
Okay.
I'm not going to mention the name because it hasn't come out publicly.
Now, you are mentioning the name Captain Smith. Tell me who Captain Smith is.
Captain Smith he was an air defense commander for the Nimitz Strike Group, and he was the commanding officer of the USS Princeton.
What's his first name?
Captain.
Are you saying that because you're protecting his identity, or?
Yeah, he hasn't really come out yet either, but it's a matter of public record who was a captain of the ship. It's kind of hard for him to hide. But as far as I know, he has never come out and said a single word about this whole thing.
And you're saying that he showed a surprising lack of curiosity in what was encountered. Is that correct?
Yes, I have to say that's true. Yes. And
what's your theory on that?
I asked him point blank. I said, "Hey, sir, no one has an idea of what these things could be. What do you think?" And he looks at me quite seriously. He says, "I don't know. Maybe spontaneously forming ice from outer space," is what he said.
He said that as a joke or seriously?
Yeah, and I actually laughed right in his face. I was like, "Oh shit!" I just laughed at the captain, but he let me get away with it, I guess, and I went on about my way, just kind of shaking my head. Because this was not spontaneously forming ice, let me tell you that.
And who did he report to?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we may have audio problems because it's kind of dropping.
Nope, I accidentally hit the mute button.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
who did Captain Smith report to?
The admiral on the USS Nimitz, who actually, according to what Commander Fravor has been saying all along, also displayed an unusual incuriousness about this whole thing. Refused to do anything about it, according to Commander Fravor.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have a belief as to why the admiral and the captain were not more interested in this?
You know, Jim, I've thought so much about this question. People ask me all the time, "Hey, Kevin, what were these things?" And to this moment, I don't know. You know, I don't know. And that's God's honest truth. my mind is open about it. And because these things never once displayed any type of hostilities to us. If I could describe their behavior, Jim, it was like throwing a rock into a flock of birds on the ground and they scatter, and then they rejoin as a group and they go on about their merry way. Mm-hmm. That's exactly how these things behaved. They just wanted to go from point A to point B, and for us to leave them the hell alone.
And had you ever encountered UAPs of any type before?
Never.
And what about since?
Never.
So I think it's interesting, very interesting, obviously, as we try to figure out what this is, the fact that the admiral and the captain were not more curious about it, because for me, that tends to point in the direction of this possibly being U.S. technology that they were in the know on that others were not. So only at a certain level were they informed as to what this is.
It certainly points that way, doesn't it? And I can't deny that the logic of that at all. And I have to tell you, Jim, if that becomes the case, I'm going to be kind of upset about it. I mean, I don't have any intention of making a big stink about it, but it would really bug me because earlier when I described our training, I described a single word of safety. And I designed exercises for a living. This is what I did for a living, right? And for another entity, another part of government to come onto my exercise and layer another test or exercise on top of it that's potentially dangerous and I don't know about it, that's not a good thing. In fact, it's probably even illegal.
Well, if the admiral was in on it and the captain was in on it, then that would be a level of knowledge at least, according to the Air Force intelligence specialist who came on our show, Mike Turber, he said it was actually the Air Force that was testing the technology. I can't
argue with your logic on this at all.
Mm-hmm. It would obviously be incredible new U.S. technology.
Yeah, and where the hell is it? I mean, that could solve a lot of problems, couldn't it? If we had this type, I mean, it could create a lot of problems. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that type of thing getting into the wrong hands is pretty disconcerting to a guy like me. But on the other hand, think just the environment alone could benefit from something like this. If we're not burning fossil fuels anymore.
Have you seen those Navy patents that were issued in the last couple of years that describe?
I've seen them online. There's a lot of physicists out there kind of poo-pooing the drawings, saying they're bogus, it wouldn't work. I mean, there's people on both sides of the fence on that.
Yeah, well, it seems bizarre that the Navy would have these patents be public if we really had this type of technology. So it appears that it could be some type of disinformation campaign, but it certainly, I'm no scientist, but when I read it, it kind of makes sense. And there's a long history of research on anti-gravity technology. So in considering the amount of money we spend on black projects every year, I've heard numbers like over $30 billion every year for decades.
Wow.
It's got to result in something.
Yeah, I would hope so. That's a lot of money.
So what about testing? For instance, testing your radar system. Is that something that the military does?
Yeah, and there's another theory a private theory, and I'm going to speculate here a little bit. I only had a secret clearance, and there's lots of security clearances above what I had. And apparently, before the Princeton had gotten underway for that training exercise, we had received a major technology upgrade that I didn't know anything about. And I think it's entirely possible that technology upgrade suddenly allowed us to see these things in the sky. Mm-hmm. I just think that's a possibility. And for me, at least, it goes, it kind of points in the direction of why since 2004, a lot of other ships have been seeing them too, because now everyone has the technology that we had.
Right.
But I'm speculating.
Were you the first? Were you the first ship to get that, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yes.
And do you understand exactly what the upgrade in technology was?
I don't. Nope, it's still classified at top secret levels. It upgraded our ability to detect and track on the spy radar. Other than that, I don't. Haven't even inquired about it because I knew I probably wouldn't get an answer.
What do you know about the use of phased array radar these days? I believe it was Turbo was telling us that it's becoming more commonplace for it to be used in, say, even non-military circumstances or in normal aviation.
Yeah, normal radars, the typical traditional radar would rotate. That's why you get the blips and the sweep would go around and rotate. Phased arrays looking in all directions all the time, all at once. And the Spy 1 radar is actually a phased array radar system. But you're absolutely right. Now, this radar technology is probably in every military in the world by now, at some level.
And what about even for use in, say, commercial aircraft travel?
I don't know if it's being used there yet or not, to be honest with you.
But the more this is put in place, the more these things could be discovered theoretically.
Absolutely.
But why wouldn't normal radar pick them up?
It kind of goes back to the question of what the hell they were. I mean, these things, I hesitate to say it, but these things actually seemed like they were alive. The way they behaved, they were definitely conscious and they were smart.
Mm-hmm.
So, and believe me, I'm not trying to say that these were living creatures at all. I'm just trying to describe the way that they behaved. They definitely behaved like a flock of birds. Mm-hmm. And the question of what types of radars could track them really kind of depends on what the hell they are. What are they made out of? How do they operate?
But certainly in all your years in the military, you never heard of any technology remotely similar to this that the U.S. military had.
Other than the Spy 1 radar, no.
But as far as anything similar to these Tic Tacs or anything regarding
you mean the UAPs?
Yeah, no, the UAPs.
No. I mean, I'm a long time listener to Coast to Coast AM. I've always had an armchair interest in this subject. Much like a lot of people, most likely. But in other words, our training never once ever involved the idea or the planning to be working around UFOs, for example. And that's one of the things that concerned me here, Jim, because what if what happened off the coast of San Diego in 2004 happened now today? And the strike group happened to be off in a volatile situation. Let's pick your country, right? And there's hostilities are right on the verge of breaking out. And all of a sudden, when these UAP objects comes at one of our aircraft and she gets afraid and she shoots a Sidewinder missile, which is there's no radar support. It's infrared only. And the UFO, whatever you want to call it, goes zorching back up into outer space. And all of a sudden this missile's now looking for a new target. And it just acquired a commercial airliner and shoots another one of those down. I'm telling you, my brother, that could start a war.
Mm-hmm.
That's my concern about them. We do need to start training to the reality that we have things in our skies that we don't know what it is. And if that's being done, I'm very happy with my Navy right now, I have to tell you.
Have you communicated with any of the guys from the Roosevelt that had their encounters on the East Coast?
We're trying to make those connections now, in fact, but no, I haven't.
So let's talk about this possibility that it could be some type of phantom technology to dupe a radar system. There was a big article on The Drive, if you saw this, about this Nemesis project. Are you familiar with that?
When did that article come out? Was it recently?
Only a couple months ago.
I don't know if I've seen that one yet. I'm going to go back and see if I can find it because that name doesn't.
So I'll read you a short blurb from it. The Navy has been developing and integrating multiple types of unmanned vehicles, shipboard and submarine systems, countermeasures, and electronic warfare payloads and communication technologies to give it the ability to project what is, in essence, phantom fleets of aircraft, ships, and submarines.
That definitely describes what we saw. I have to tell you, the only part of that theory that maybe I might have an issue with is the fact that several air crews actually saw these objects with their own eyeballs. So I'm not sure how you would do that part. I'm not sure how you trick the human eyeball.
Right.
I can understand confusing the systems and the radar and stuff. In fact, when this all happened, we were concerned that we actually had something like that going on, and there was some system malfunction. So the technicians on board the Princeton, we brought down all of our computers, brought down the radar, ran a bunch of diagnostics tests, and brought everything back up. And when it was all done, these objects were came in even stronger than they were before.
Were you aware that apparently everybody on board the Hawkeye saw it with their own eyes?
When it happened, I wasn't, but I am now today. I've heard this from some other people that have come out recently.
So
I guess it flew right past their airframe.
Correct. So would that put it at approximately 11, the people who saw it with their own eyes, if you got the 3 fighter jets and the 5 people on the Hawkeye?
What's the question? Put it where?
As far as how many people have actually claimed to have seen this now with their own eyes?
That's probably a good count. It was right in that neighborhood.
And I think that you said in the prior interview that you believe that other F-18s encountered them also after the Fravor mission.
Yeah, because Commander Fravor launched, he was up doing his functional check flight to make sure his aircraft was working properly. And behind him, a bunch of other aircraft launched. And there was one point in time when there were several intercepts going on of these objects. And at one point, Jim, seemed to me it was like a raining UFOs. As soon as the air crews got close, they would fall out from 28,000 feet, go down to the surface of the water. And when the air crew left, they would go straight back up to 28,000 feet, rejoin in a loose formation, and they kept tracking south at 100 knots as if nothing fun had just happened.
But it didn't seem to me that Fravor or any of the other pilots described observing more than one at a time.
Yeah, because when we vector them to a single object, so it's just possible they didn't see the other ones.
Mm-hmm. And what do you make of the whole thing of what Fravor saw as far as the disturbance in the water?
That's fascinating to me. Whatever this object was, it seemed to, according to Fravor's testimony, and I believe him, one of the best damn Navy pilots ever produced by the Navy. This object seemed to be interested in something making a froth in the water, or versa versa. Maybe that frothy thing in the water was interested in the UAP. In other words, it could have been something simple like marine life of some kind. Mm-hmm. And hell, it was just as interested in the UAP as we were, because they saw it.
Yeah, I mean, we do have
tuna fish or something.
We do have the report that the submarine that was in the area did not detect anything, correct?
That's my understanding as well.
Mm-hmm.
No detections were made.
So let's talk a little bit about your time since then and what you're up to now. And we mentioned underwater life. I know you've got a project now, and in reading about it, you're referring to whales and so forth. So tell us what you're up to now.
Yeah, if I could kind of provide some context to that whole thing. When I transferred off the Princeton in late 2004, early 2005, I went to my final duty station. I was planning on retiring, and at my new duty station, Commander Naval Air, the air boss for the Navy, I went to work on his staff, and I tried to tell people about it, and people either A, didn't believe me, or B, they weren't curious about it, and it really concerned me. So I didn't know what the hell to do. So I retired from the Navy, and my concerns actually started to manifest into nightmares, because it really, really bugged me. And I didn't know what to do, Jim. So what I decided to finally do, I was going to try to do something positive with it. So I sat down and I wrote a short story based on the Tic Tac encounters, and I call it The Seer. It's totally fictional. And I did that on purpose to protect people still in uniform and everything. And I wrote a couple of other short stories, and I put them all into a book, and I published it in the Library of Congress.
And what year was that?
That was early 2009.
Okay. So for about 4 years, afterwards, but this was weighing on you during this entire period.
Yeah, it dramatically affected me.
Is it fair to say is it fair to say that during that period, in your mind, these things were probably extraterrestrial?
I like to say they were non-Newtonian, because I think that's closer to what I can honestly state. Because in other words, it's possible. It's both. It's non-Newtonian, but it's not extraterrestrial. Maybe it's something quite terrestrial. We just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it doesn't necessarily have to be aliens, quote unquote.
Yeah. But for you to be having, I guess my question is for you to be having nightmares about it, etc. Describe the nightmares and why you think you were having these.
I started having out of the blue eschatological type dreams, like end of the world type disaster dreams. Comets impacting the ocean, humongous tsunamis, forest fires, earthquakes, just all kinds of crazy stuff. And you have nightmares. We all have nightmares. The nightmares themselves didn't bug me, but remember them in the daytime later did, because it would just bring back the whole thing, and it would kind of cause like a flashback effect. And
do you think that could be because deep down you did believe it was extraterrestrial?
I think you hit the nail on the head for me personally, but that's just my personal feeling. I have no evidence to support that other than any more than what you might.
And since then, have you done a lot more of your own digging and research, et cetera, on UAPs?
Yeah, I'd kind of moved on in life. I ended up coming back to my hometown in Cave Junction, Oregon, and ended up buying a small farm. And I started volunteering down at the local golf course because I heard it was struggling. It was getting ready to foreclose. And I was like, no, not on my watch. I got time. I'm gonna go down there and volunteer. So that's what I was doing. I had just reopened the kitchen, and about 2 years ago now, for some reason, we were watching golf at the golf course. CNN happened to be on, and all of a sudden, here's Commander Fravor talking about the Tic Tac encounter, and I was so damn shocked, Jim. I dropped a plate of food on the ground and immediately went home and got on the internet. And I got a gentleman from the Scientific Coalition of Ufology. His name's Robert Powell. I don't know how he had done it so quickly, but he actually had a YouTube video up on it from the CNN story. And I got on the chat box there and I said, hey, you need to contact me because I'm the guy that found him, and I'm the one found him on radar, and here's my stuff. Contact me. And he did right away. One thing led to another, and I ended up getting pulled into a Facebook group. And now a lot of those members on our Facebook group, the end result of it, what's happening now is we actually formed a nonprofit organization called UAP Expeditions. And we've got some pretty, I could read you the list here. We've got a pretty top-notch crew of scientists that have all volunteered. We're gonna charter 2 research vessels down in San Diego. We're gonna anchor one off San Clemente Island, and one's gonna be underway. And in addition to that, we've got a bunch of cutting-edge, high-tech equipment we're taking with us. And the idea behind it is we're going to go back there about the same time of year. It's planned for December of 2020. And we hope to find these things again. And we hope to collect scientific data in a bunch of different types of modalities. It's going to be unassailable because you're going to have the eyewitness accounts from scientists backed up by data that we're going to collect. Because we have a theory, Jim. We all of us believe, or we wouldn't be doing this, that these things they're findable, they're observable, and they're also probably knowable. And we all know we could be wrong. And if it turns out we're wrong, then that's the answer. We're not afraid of being wrong. I just don't think that we are. I think that we will find something.
And describe the technology that you guys will be using to find them.
Okay, I'm going to read you a list of some of the stuff we got here. It's pretty cool stuff, actually. We got something called a photodiode binoculars, and what that does is it turns images into sound and then back again. In other words, it's kind of a night vision thing. Mm-hmm. I pointed up to the sky, I look at a commercial airliner with it, and it'll turn that image into a sound file. and then I can take that sound file and turn it back into an image. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We've got some of the almost military grade night vision stuff. Binoculars we're taking. We got a system called UAP DAP. It's a UAP data acquisition program. Christopher O'Brien and his group's doing that. And that's a piece of gear specifically designed using IR technologies to detect, track, and record UAP activities. We're taking a neutrino detector. That's with Professor Kevin Knuth out of the CUNY in Albany, New York. That's his gear. Of course, we'll have magnetometers on board with all kinds of various video cameras. We'll have thermal cameras. We have a system that's under construction right now. It's called a light wave transmitter. That's David Mason. He's an inventor engineer. He's bringing that toy with him. We're bringing several different telescopes. We've got giant binoculars. We've got night vision photodiodes that we're bringing. We're bringing a system called a long wave IR system. That's also it turns modulated long wave IR into sound. RF spectrum analyzers, oscilloscopes, long period antennas, digital AV recorders, and we're taking along an H2O chamber. Excuse me.
Well, may I suggest all kinds
of miscellaneous gears, cable.
I suggest you not announce when you guys are going to be there, because if this is U.S. technology, the military may decide not to fly them around that time.
They may indeed, or they maybe we're the group they want us. You know, I think whoever they is, they want me to do what I'm doing. Can you still hear me? I got a weird message on the screen.
Yep, I heard what you said.
And the reason why I say that, Jim, is because back in 2015, I had been up when I first back to Southern Oregon. I had become obsessed with finding, going back and exploring an old mining claim that my family had, and I actually found the mother lode. But that's a whole nother story. Anyway,
the mother lode meeting a lot of gold or what?
Yeah, I found a huge gold deposit.
Oh my gosh!
I can't. No one in our family ever wants to mine it. In fact, we probably never could. It's right in the middle of the wilderness, and it's a 154 million year old sea bottom thermal smoker. You know, those black smokers you see on some of the History Channel and Discovery Channel programs on the bottom of the ocean. And we have an extinct camp of hydrothermal vents that laid down a huge mineral deposit that my family had mined using water giants back in the 1930s.
Wow, crazy.
We have no going to do that again. It's just sitting back there, and in fact, we're probably back to the government. Anyway, I came out of the wilderness, and I thought it was, at the time, I thought it was happenstance, but I went over to a friend's house that was helping us with supplies and logistics while we were up there. And there was two guys there. And the next day they show up at my house, and it comes out that they had purposely sought me out because they were from the government, quote unquote. And they had seen my research on the mine online, and they wanted to train special forces back there in the canyon because it's so damn rugged. And they wanted my cousin and I to take them back out there. So already suspicious. I thought their story was BS from the start. My cousin and myself and a couple other of our friends took them back up there. And I think it was just a cover story, Jim. I really do. I think their real purpose, and Lou Elizondo actually confirmed this to me later on. I think their real purpose was to ascertain my mental state, so they could make a determination how useful I was going to be when this story came out. Because although they never told me why they were there, they had left me enough hints that later on I was able to figure it out. In fact, the leader, in fact, the other guy, Forrest, who called him Shakate and called him boss. So I figured he must be the boss. He looks at me right in the eye right before he left. Last time I ever talked to him, he said, and he started crying, man. He got really emotional all of a sudden. He said, "Kevin, you are incredibly important to what's about to happen." And Jim, I got to tell you, man, I thought these guys were nuts. I didn't know what to make of it. So I just kind of brushed it off as more weird, and I went on. But now that all this has happened, I understand why they came to see me. I understand totally now. In fact, when Lou Elizondo came to interview me here at my house in Oregon, when Tom DeLong and him came and met them, I asked him, I said, "Do you know those guys?" And the only thing I could get out of him, he was like, "Yeah, I've exchanged emails with him." Kind of winked at me a little bit, and didn't really. I couldn't get no more out of him other than that. So, long story short,
he was being serious though. Elizondo saying that he was being serious. That yes, I know the guy who came to visit you.
Yeah, he said he had to exchange emails with him, to quote him precisely what he said. So based on all of that, Jim.
Yeah. Well, sorry, one last question about that. What division of the military were they from? These two guys?
They never said, and I never asked them. I knew they wouldn't tell me anyway.
But it was military as opposed to just government generally?
I'm making an assumption it was military because they wanted to train special forces, so it had to have been something related to the military. But based on all that, and the fact that no one's knocked on my door and said, "Hey, Kevin, we love you, man, but you got to shut up about this." And I would, Jim. If that happened, I would. I'm a patriot. I'm a huge defender of our national security apparatus, and the last thing I want to do is get us in trouble here. But none of that's happened. In fact, just the opposite. I think I've been encouraged to come out and talk about this, and that's why I think the government plans to leave our UAP expeditions alone. I could be wrong, but that's what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I think for whatever reason we've been chosen to break this out.
Yeah, but again, we don't know what you're breaking out. Is this the beginning of the leaking?
We don't. We could.
Yeah, it could be preparing for the U.S. government to disclose this secret technology that it has had for decades, or at least a couple decades.
Certainly could be. Yep. I can't disagree with your logic on that either.
Yeah.
It's privately what I think, in fact.
So that's what you lean to at this point, based on having all the years behind you now, is that it's more likely than not U.S. technology?
Yeah, that's what I have to lean towards.
Yeah.
I do. Now, where the hell it came from, that's another question. How long we've had it, that's another question. Because, for the last 70 years now, certainly there's better incidents with other people that describe pretty much what we saw. So if their stories are also true, then how does that make this technology now?
Yeah, it's certainly been studied.
It's a confusing question.
Yeah, it's certainly been studied for decades, right? This gravity-defying technology, like magnetic fields, et cetera. The stuff that's described in that Navy patent, essentially.
Right.
So,
how long have we had it?
Well, the big question I had was, how could we have possibly kept something like this secret for so long? It just didn't seem like that's possible. But in talking to some experts, they said, well, there's been a number of examples of the U.S. keeping technology truly secret for decades.
Yeah, and until recently, maybe they weren't concerned about because everyone didn't have a cell phone for all those years, and there wasn't phased array radars, and there wasn't UAP data acquisition type. There wasn't night vision goggles that can turn images into sound and back again. Maybe it's a function of they realize now, but because of technology, they're not going to be able to hide it any longer.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned whales. Tell me about whales and how they play into what this expedition that you guys are going on.
Well, that goes back on it's just a research question that since we're there, we're going to explore it based on it goes back to the behavior of these things. Like Commander Fravor's testimony that something in the water was interested in the UAP or the UAP was interested in something in the water. And just the basic behavior of these objects, they were definitely non-hostile, non-aggressive, behave like a flock of birds. So we're at least going to ask the question, okay, are they interested in something in the water? And if they are, what is it? What the hell is it? So one of the things we intend to do is we tend to get on station and broadcast whale songs into the sky. Broadcast images of whales into the sky, and just see if it manifests the appearance of UAP. Essentially,
all of that.
It's just a research question, and again, we could.
All of that, I presume, would be more leaning in the direction of the possibility that these things are extraterrestrial, because it wouldn't make sense that the U.S. military cares about whales. You wouldn't think.
No, I think you're right. I can't argue with your logic.
Cool. Let me ask Michael, since he's I don't know if you know this, but Michael used to host a show where he did some very deep dives into UFOs, so he's quite the expert. Did you have any follow-up questions for him? Make sure you get it. Go ahead and get on, Mike.
Bring it, Michael.
Just one question. And Jim and I were talking about this earlier based upon what some other folks have discussed. And this idea that these two men took the drives, well, 4 men, 2 off of each ship. Would it be possible that those men were on the ship before this even happened, and because there's so many people on these boats, 5,000 to 6,000 people, that they could have just been sequestered in their quarters somewhere? And if so, you would think that possibly there would be ship's logs that would show who was coming and going from those boats.
In the case of Princeton, I would say no. That would be more possible on the USS Nimitz.
Okay.
In fact, there was the HSL debt was on board. The helo debt was on board the ship. That we get a couple of helicopter supports when we go on deployment. Anyway, that detachment was there, and I've actually spoken to one of the air crewmen that actually was on the helo when these guys came on board the ship. They got off the aircraft. They spent a little bit of time on the ship, and they got back on the helicopter and went back to the Nimitz. So at least in the case of the Princeton, assuming that his testimony is accurate, 2 gentlemen came and took our data and they left.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to be talking to Voorhees later today about that. He describes them as having been in plain clothes, whereas PJ on the Nimitz says they were in Air Force flight suits.
Yeah, 2 different ships, and both my shipmates are probably telling the truth on that one. I would have to think. You guys remember this was a long time ago now, 15 years. So although our memories are probably good, they're not perfect.
Yeah, but super interesting what PJ has to say, that it was Air Force flight suits, which tends to put the pieces of this puzzle together as far as this possibility that it was Air Force technology that was being tested.
I can't argue with your logic.
Yeah. Thank you again to Kevin Day for that interview. Next week, we're going to have Gary Voorhees, who was also on the Princeton. He tells the story of how 2 men in plain clothes landed aboard the ship on a helicopter and then showed up in his office minutes later to take recordings of the incident from him. He'll also share with us his opinion as to what these things were. So that's next week. Gary Voorhees, also military veteran from the Princeton at the time of the USS Nimitz incident. Thank you all for listening to The Hidden Truth Show. Thank you to Michael Parker, our producer. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.